Hi, everyone. I'm Vu Tran. I teach fiction here in the program. Thanks so much for coming tonight. Because the New Voices series, if you're not familiar with it, it's always one of my favorites of the year. Not only do we have an exciting new voice in the writing world visiting us, but they've also chosen a student to read alongside them, a new voice themselves, right? What's doubly special tonight is that our new voice in fiction this year was a student here a few years back. She was briefly in the divinity school before choosing her way as a writer, and it very much was a choice, if I remember correctly. And she also took a couple of classes with me. One of the best writers and best humans I've ever worked with. So I'm just, wonderfully proud and moved and thrilled that she's come back to show us what an incredible writer she's become. So a little bit about Rebecca Sachs for you. She also goes by they and is a graduate of the programs in writing at UC Irvine. She's been awarded grants, prizes, and fellowships from the Canada Council for the Arts, the Elizabeth George Foundation, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, which I was there with her, and the Mellon Sawyer Documenting War Seminar Series. A graduate of Dartmouth College, she worked for several years at Vanity Fair before moving to Tel Aviv to pursue an MA in Jewish Studies. And a bit after that was when I first met her. So, City of a Thousand Gates, her books are right all over there, was published this past year by HarperCollins, is Rebecca's first novel, and I'm gonna gush a bit. It's such an ambitious, honest, and unflinching novel, in my opinion. We're thrust into the West Bank and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We're plunged erratically into the lives of people on every side of it, and specifically into a moment where a 14-year-old Jewish girl has been stabbed to death in her own bed. And in response to this, is he 14 years old too? Yeah. A 14-year-old Palestinian boy has just been beaten into a coma outside a mall. And as the aftermath unfolds toward more unknown tragedy, Rebecca goes into the heads of, I believe, at least 32 characters. Is that the total, or did you just lose track?
Yeah.
Often back and forth between several characters in the same chapter. Soldiers, football players, a reporter, a cartoonist, lovers, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters and siblings, people at all levels of society and social awareness, each of them dealing with their own personal dramas within their small world of family and friends, even as this dark wound in the larger world festers in them too. You can feel it. All these disparate and contradictory stories are both literally and philosophically one story. And yet somehow Rebecca manages to keep things clear and propulsive and tense. It really is a page turner. But also she manages to make every single character come alive, particularly in these unexpected glimpses into their complicated desires and prejudices. For me, I know when I'm reading really great prose, when the sentences are not only exceptionally crafted, but they never give me what I expect, right? They continually surprise me with what they say and leave unsaid about the characters and the world. I think it's the most difficult and most courageous kind of empathy, to dive unflinchingly into a human drama with, as we all know, so many violently conflicting sensitivities at play. And the goal, I think, at least, is not sympathy or justification or even balance. It's just to reveal, to peer at, these endless permutations of humanity, Anyway, it's a fantastic book. You should go and buy it and read it. But for now, please help me welcome Rebecca Sachs back to you, Chicago.
Wow. Thank you very much. Well, sorry, that's very lovely. Vu is a very important teacher to me. If you haven't taken his classes, I really suggest you do. They may change your life. All right, I'm going to read two short sections of a chapter in the point of view of someone named Samar. And before I begin, I'll just say quickly, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. It's such a special homecoming. So thank you all so much for having me. So I'm going to start on page 23 for those who like to follow along, and then I'll skip to 164. We're in the point of view of a Palestinian academic named Samar. The pages I'll open with are at a checkpoint between Bethlehem and Jerusalem in the West Bank, and later we'll be in Chicago, when in Chicago. I guess a quick note on my positionality. I'm reading a character who is a West Bank Palestinian academic. I am a white Jewish person, just to be transparent about that. All right. At the crossing into Jerusalem, Samar tries to hold on to herself. She edges into the cages of checkpoint 300, single file, in a line of people with permits to cross. She knows she is lucky that she did not have to travel in the morning, when the men arrive as early as 4 a.m. to cram themselves into the winding walkway of cement and bars. Even now, early afternoon, she has waited over an hour to get to the head of the line. Bodies push against Samar, everyone pushing up to the front, pushing their way to the soldiers, a mass of people constantly at risk of trampling themselves. Nearby, someone's festering sweat is giving off the overpowering smell of onions. Samar has her awiya ready, her entry permit carefully folded. There are only 5 people ahead of her. Each person waits until this turnstile beeps green. Then you must walk awkwardly. Sidestep through the turnstile, never mind if you have a stroller, crutches, a wheelchair. In the autumn, she read a brilliant article in Kippur about the nature of the turnstiles at the Israeli checkpoints, how they are specifically designed to be difficult to maneuver, that what seems like a malfunction is in fact a form of tactical degradation. Samar herself has written about checkpoints, papers in Arabic, English, German. As an academic, she has read the checkpoint through a variety of theoretical lenses that, if they don't make the experience mean something, at least communicate the senselessness of her life within the Israeli system. But at the checkpoint itself, it doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter that she has a brilliant mind, that she is on her way to pick up a visa that will allow her to attend an academic conference in Chicago and present a paper there. It doesn't matter that her articles on the violence of bureaucracy, memorial, and nation states are widely cited. It doesn't matter from within the moment what she will do later to narrativize the moment. What matters is that she breathes, that she does not panic in the cage of the checkpoint, that she does not turn around and yell at the person behind her, "Get your hands off me." Samar stands tiptoe to see over a large woman carrying her groceries, 2 teenage girls with books, high school students maybe, and a middle-aged man her own age. At the X-ray machine, an elderly man is having trouble with his belt. One of the soldiers keeps asking him the same pointless question. "What?" he asks, one hand on his weapon. "What? What?" When Samar found that her paper had been accepted by the conference in Chicago, she felt not gratification, but a panic that was only made worse by the organizers' enthusiastic phone calls, ensuring her that all expenses would be covered. A nightmare of logistics ensued. An entry permit into Jerusalem to secure an entry visa from the Americans, a transit visa from the Jordanians, too much approval, too many forms. Not for you, she coaxed herself, but for the work, trying to imagine it as a separate entity. In measures of minutes and sentences, Samar has tried to build a life for her mind. She tends to the work, They sustain one another like a garden, or maybe like a child. Of course, Mother does not want Samar to go present her paper at the conference in Chicago. I almost lost you once, she says, referring to the years of graduate work in England. As if Samar were leaving not for a few days, but for years, and as if Samar did not come back in time to see her father die and the wall completed, the checkpoints formalized. Now, Samar gets by on the scraps of the English department at Bethlehem University, teaching lower-level composition that nobody else wants. It leaves little time for her own research on nationalism and erasure. She pushes her work to the side, apologizes for it. Samar watches a gray dove fly in the barred window of the long, narrow, caged corridor where she and dozens of others are wedged like livestock to be slaughtered. The bird flies in one window and out the other. She closes her eyes and tries to breathe. When it is her turn, the blonde soldier waves her through, and Samar wedges herself through the turnstile. The red-haired soldier watches Samar as she puts her purse on the machine. They are all standing on a concrete floor under harsh lights. Once she passes through this machine, she will bring her papers to the girl soldiers behind the glass up ahead, who will ask her where she lives, Bethlehem, where she is going, Jerusalem, for an appointment regarding her travel visa to America. But when she steps through the body scanner, it beeps. Samar freezes. She looks at the redhead soldier. He is as young as the students she teaches at the university. He has his hand on his weapon now as he waves at her to walk through again. The machine must be broken. When she dressed this morning, Samar was careful, not wearing so much as a belt, nothing that would set off these machines. She walks back around to the body scanner. The woman behind her in line, large with two little girls, sighs with impatience. Samar steps through again. It beeps. The red-haired soldier motions her to stop. He says something to the blonde soldier standing behind Samar, closer to the turnstiles. The blonde soldier laughs, says something back. Samar is not moving. She is careful not to move her hands too quickly, not to give either of them a reason to shoot. So I'm going to jump forward now in the book and read from the only chapter that takes place abroad, which is to say, in America. So at this point in the novel, I'm on page 164. Samar is indeed at the academic conference she was working towards getting towards when we met her in the first chapter. Yeah, come in. And all you really need to know is that she presented a paper earlier in this chapter and feels it went well, although has left the wine and cheese. Cold, the shock of it. How lovely. And how good it is to be out of that room. Cold. So cold it hurts to breathe. From her bag, she pulls out the accessories. Hat on, scarf around her neck. Last of all, hands into gloves. Bought all as a set. Purple, with a silvery filament woven in. Kind of girlish, but why not? She walks quickly in what she hopes is the right direction. She walks with her hands bunched in her gloves, her periphery obscured by the scarf bundled around her neck and ears. She heads across a quad covered in a thin, filthy layer of snow, crunching along the salted path. She looks down at her feet. She looks up at the huge Gothic buildings covered in dead ivy like stilled veins, then back down at her feet. The leather boots she wears are cute, but not much against the cold. She grips and ungrips her toes as she walks, hoping that keeps some blood in them. This is her first time in America. She has some distant cousins in California. Years ago, they came to visit Palestine, but it's been a long time since the Israelis let them in. Before she flew, she sent a message to two of her California cousins with questions about Chicago, the weather and safety, if there were guns on campus, white supremacists. One of the two wrote back, "I hear it's cold there," she said. "Also, if you are alone, don't speak Arabic in public, not even on the phone." Off the quad and onto the sidewalk. Crunch, crunch, crunch. She passes posters taped up along a cement wall. Math tutor available. Black Lives Matter. 2000s themed party at the Student Center. Campus Republicans meet next week. Study Korean. Rape crisis hotline. Vote in the student elections. A black and white photograph of a young black woman at what looks like a graduation ceremony has handwritten text underneath. Say her name. Next to it, another, half torn down. She thinks about her own students, hopes that the grad student, not even a lecturer, who agreed to cover her classes this week at least takes attendance. She knows she is supposed to resent her students and the time they steal from her, but she likes them this semester, likes them every semester, really. They are young and bright. She knows, of course she knows, that she thinks about them more than they think about her. They tug her away from her own work, her own research. She frets about their little ideas, the shortcomings of their work, which are, of course, her own shortcomings, the concepts she has failed to make clear. I'm going to skip forward a little and end with about a page and a half, and then I'll be happy to take questions. The sun is relentlessly bright. She's still on her walk. She is within a boundary that the medievalist, this is the person who has invited her to the conference, that the medievalist described to Samar during their conversations over Skype, a few blocks by a few blocks. Those are the safest areas, the medievalist said, smiling. I'll email a map. Samar knew this code, what safe meant in this context, coming from this woman. Safe meant not black. Safe for whom? That was one of Mother's words back then. Safe. I'm trying to keep you safe, she would hiss, with what seemed like rage to Samar at the time, but now seems to be more about fear. Love, fear, control, hate. It is so hard to distinguish. What was it Mother feared when she stood in the doorway waiting for Samar to come home from high school, ready to interrogate her? Mother had no shortage of children to yell at, but it was Samar, the only girl, and yet, no denying it, the most like her father, that Mother singled out, or so it seems to Samar. It always started the same way. Let me ask you a question, almost sung to her gently. Then it was a careful, strategic series of moves, establishing that perhaps Samar had not come home directly, but had stopped for a can of soda or an ice cream with friends. And then Mother could finally yell out what she wanted to yell out, which was something along the lines of, "Do you know what people will think of you?" These were the years that her father had spent in Saudi Arabia, earning money as a translator for American businessmen and sending most of it home. So maybe Mother was afraid of her own loneliness, her own isolation, and somehow Samar's world, already opening up, already expanding, terrified Mother too. That might be a true answer, but it strikes Samar as an incomplete one. Even today, the words, "Let me ask you a question," freeze all the water inside Samar. Mother still says it, but when she says it, she's really just asking a question. "Let me ask you a question," she'll sing out, and then ask about some neighbor's son or whether the grocer across town has been caught weighting his scales yet. Samar has seen 40 Springs, but in those moments at their slightly lopsided table in the kitchen, the apricot tree tapping its branches against the window next to the sink, she is 13 again, and she is terrified. Sound of footsteps. On the sidewalk behind Samar, there is the sound of footsteps. No, please. She tries to turn, but it's too hard in the puffy coat and winter scarf. Sound of footsteps approaching, faster. A man, because it's always a man. Hot coal at the base of her spine, moving up. She is trying to breathe deeply, slowly, but the breath doesn't seem to reach her lungs, not the deepest part that she needs it to reach. It's coming from behind. He's coming from behind, and there's no time. No time. She needs to spin around, but can't. There is no time. On the other side of the street, a woman with a furry hat is leaning over her baby stroller, adjusting an enormous blanket that must have a baby under it. Ahead, a man in a long parka, jeans tucked into snow boots, is facing a brick wall. maybe against the wind to light a cigarette. These are the people who will watch when what happens, happens. It is a bright, freezing spring afternoon. All these people are here, and none of them are going to help her when he comes for her. Closer now, oh my God, just let it happen. Just let it be over. There is something worse than pain. It is the world itself crushing you, saying, you deserve this, you deserve this. It is believing it. Here it is. The jogger says, on your left, as he passes. The panic evaporates and floats up into the clear sky. A man jogging, that's all. She wants to weep, but knows she will not. The woman with the stroller is gone. The man in the parka leans against the building wall, smoking now. Thank you.
So Rebecca would be happy to take any questions you might have for her. I'll start things off with this for us, if that's okay.
Yeah.
With this kind of topic, with this kind of, there's so many, it would have been, I think, risky to just take one point of view. You come at it from very many different points of view. And I'm just curious, number one, if you had an organizing principle for that, and number two, how you managed your kind of, did you have anxiety about it, and how did you manage that anxiety with your organizing principle?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I very much, like, I would say, followed a lot of writing this book was like following curiosity. Many characters first appeared as like ancillary characters in another story, and I would just become curious about them, and I wanted to know what would happen when they were at the center and not just peripheral to someone else's story. Samar is actually not one of those characters. She was with me like all along, and to me is sort of like the almost like the conscience of the book. But many other characters appeared kind of as extras.
At the very center of the book.
Pardon me?
She's at the very center?
Yeah, she really is for me, and I learned a lot in writing her. I highly recommend, by the way, writing a character who's like smarter than you and better read than you. It'll really push you to, yeah. But yeah, so a lot of it was like following curiosity. I mean, I had a lot of anxiety. I have a lot of anxiety, but yeah, in writing the book. I did worry a lot about writing outside of my experience and culture, for example, was in effect like taking risks on someone else's behalf, and the lives I could be mishandling or misrepresented would be the people hurt by this, not me, and I was like very aware of that, and I'm still very aware of that, I think I tried to just like continually problematize my own work to myself, what it means for like a white Jew to write Palestinian characters, for example. And I think initially I was wondering like what would give me the right to do this. That question became uninteresting quickly, and I started to ask, like, what would it take to do this with integrity? And that felt more fruitful. I didn't have, like, a sense of, like, political balance or something I wanted. Like, that wasn't, I like the question about the organizing principle, and I think as you've, like, anticipated, it wasn't some sense of, like, some rhetorical choice, like, oh, I have someone who's this side, now I have to have someone who's this side. I think my own like kind of curiosity, like who is present in a moment and not being heard, or like who's being erased in a moment, like whoever's experience was like shadowing what I was reading, or writing, I guess reading, but writing is where I wanted to go next. And sometimes that was like political, but sometimes it could be really just like intimate. So for example, there's a character, Vera, who's a 20-something German national.
She's such a great character.
Oh my gosh. Also suggest writing mean, unhappy characters. Super fun. But like she,
Hungry.
pardon?
And
Hungry.
in
She's
so
re-
many ways, yeah.
She's really hungry. She sniffs out everyone's hypocrisy but her own. Yeah, she's great. But she started because I was writing a chapter with this young married couple, Ido and Emily, and they just had a baby and they're having a weekend away. And I just wanted to like pressurize the weekend. I was like, okay, what would really put these people into crisis? I know, like a hot 18-year-old hitchhiking. Like, this was like so cheesy, you know? I was like, okay, here we go. So I wrote this. And so for that whole chapter, she was just the German girl. Like, I didn't even know her name. That's all they called her. But the more she became someone they were projecting these fantasies on and fears on, the more I wanted her to like resist that. So by the end of that chapter, she's revealed, like, she's not 18, she's in her 20s, she's here as a reporter. Like, she's not these stories they were telling about her to fuel their fears or their fantasies or whatever it was. And then, of course, I wanted, once she revealed that, is really what it felt like. I used to always think writers were lying when they're like, I was so surprised when this character did this. But it's the truth, you know? Like, from inside what you're writing, sometimes you can't anticipate what will emerge. Like, the same way you can't anticipate what you would do if you, like, saw a car accident. Like, would you stop to help? Like, I don't know. Anyway, but, like, so after writing that chapter, I wanted to see what this Vera person, I didn't even know her name, what this German girl was all about. And, you know, actually writing from her point of view became super fruitful because she's an outsider and she's a reporter. So she's, like, articulating the landscape to herself in a way that someone from there wouldn't. It would feel like really false, you know, if someone whose life, you don't articulate to yourself the fabric of your life. If a character was doing that, it would feel like they were being enlisted to like inform on themselves. It would be, it would read bad and it would feel gross to write. But for Vera, it made sense. So she ended up being a very useful character to have. And then I put her right in the beginning. You know, I gave her a one-sided love affair, like it all started. But so that was an example of just following, not just curiosity, but like always wanting to hand off the telling to whoever had maybe been a little peripheral or erased. And maybe that was the principle a little, but I hadn't articulated that till you asked, so thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is about you as an omniscient narrator within the book and the power you have, the relation between that and your biases as a narrative person. Because you're saying that you're aware to those biases. Same time, my question is, how do you make the reader aware to these biases? Because when you're not doing that, when you're ignoring the imbalance or just not paying attention to it, the reader doesn't know these imbalances, is always going to fall into these balances. At the end of the day, I mean, I get what you're trying to do in trying to get into a Palestinian perspective that goes into, I guess a woman and academic would be much closer to your experience, and maybe that would make more sense to you. But I'm a Palestinian academic in Chicago right now, and I can assure you we're very different people. And you have no access to the way I think and to the way my colleagues think here. And again, also the priorities you set are always going to be in service of one side over another. And for example, you start off the novel with a 14-year-old kid, Jewish kid being killed, but people don't know that the murder of Palestinian children is a weekly event. Just today, a kid called Omar, 16, was murdered, a bullet in the head. His brother was arrested an hour later. A week ago, Hamad Dadas, 13-year-old kid, shot in the head. Also, just 6 hours ago, children in Khalil have been they were taken outside of their homes, put in the street while they were sleeping, and the soldiers started taking pictures of them. This is a reality that's filled with suffering at everyday level for children, and it's not just you trying to access that in a way that can do service just by you empathizing or by you paying attention to the political history of the West Bank. It's going to take a lot more effort than that. That's what I think. And you're never going to escape it. So my question is, why do you do that anyway? Why do you do that without the effort of actually talking to Palestinians and actually getting their perspective and actually giving Palestinians a platform to talk for themselves. Because I'm sure if I'm going to read the Jewish character in your book, it's going to be done much more service than this.
Well, first of all, thank you. You know, you've brought up some points that certainly are important to voice. Sorry, what was your name?
Amir.
Pardon me? Ariel?
Amir.
Amir. Hi, nice to meet you, Amir. What do you teach here?
I study here.
Ah, what are you studying?
Divinity.
Ah.
I used to be at Tel Aviv University too.
I dropped out of the divinity school, so there you go. Very cool. So a few things. I mean, one is you asked a few questions, all of them worth asking. There's definitely, I'll say, the book is a reflection of maybe slightly more engagement with Palestinian voices than one might anticipate. So there's a lot of time spent in Palestine with Palestinian families, and a lot of their stories are reflected, which I don't mean to as a sort of defense, but more just I share your concerns, and they're important to me. And I think the ubiquity of Palestinian death is a reality also reflected in the book, I hope, which I don't mean to say that you shouldn't be asking these things, but just to say I think about them too. Why I wrote this book instead of using my platform to, I guess, lift up Palestinian voices is a good question. The book, in a way, gave me a platform. So I do try, in, for example, the acknowledgments, I try to direct people to a lot of sort of Palestinian fiction and filmmaking. But it is true that I decided to write this book. I didn't, for example, get my Arabic to a level where I could translate a Palestinian writer. I can't say what the impulse towards fiction is, or why I felt compelled towards this material, but I don't know who can answer that question for their work. But I'm also, in my limited and outside experience, being a Palestinian is a state of constant erasure, and also being lied to that this erasure isn't happening. So the idea that I was somehow participating in that is something I think about, and I can't say whether I think it was impossible to write this book and do no harm. That's probably true. But I really tried to not just hold myself accountable, but to work with people who could help me hold myself accountable. For example, hiring Palestinian readers to read it and kind of, just push back where that would be necessary. I'm not saying that means that the book is now uncritiquable, but just that, I guess all I can say is that I share your concerns, and I hope in some ways they are reflected in how Palestinian characters are depicted, and that one narrative isn't prioritized over the other, including, I should say, the narrative lie of even the word conflict sometimes to me feels like a narrative lie, in the sense two sides equally matched, locked in some historical, religiously inflected battle, when the reality is it's a colonial superpower and an indigenous population, so it's even the narratives that we use to talk about the conflict and the language that we use often will sort of perpetuate lies, and these lies kill people and render their lives, try to depict their lives as essentially meaningless or valueless, you know, the less dead, some might say. So, yeah, so I can't resolve these questions, but they're important to me, and I thank you for voicing them.
Can I ask one more small question?
Sure.
Do you know Arabic?
Yeah, I mean, I studied here, and then I studied Fusha here, and then I show up in Palestine, I'm speaking Fusha. They're like, sorry, are you with the CIA? Like, what's wrong with you? So I studied Amia in Palestine. Anyone else? Yeah.
I was hoping you could just talk about your personal experience living there and how just if you could say something to the students here about how the process of all the notes you took and all the writing you did about, that was nonfiction, a lot of which I read 7 years ago in this very room, and how it became this now, like that journey. What tips do you have for students on how to transmute their research and their lived experience into art over a course of years? What did you learn about that process?
Yeah, a great question. And I should say, you know, credit where it's due. Some of the tactics I learned for engaging with big amounts of material came from you, Dan. Like I think you had a cork board. Or like it was about getting the writing up on the wall. I can't remember what you had, but I interpreted it as the way I like made it happen is I started with a cork board and I had all the pages up, and then when the cork board was insufficient, it was like a clothesline with these little, it was like very Etsy of me, these like little clothespins like hanging it all up, and then the clothespins got too expensive, so now I just tape all the pages up with masking tape. But anyway, like some of the first conversations I had about just like the logistics of having a lot of material, a lot of pages, we talked about it in your workshop. So, but yeah, okay. So basically taking like life writing and turning it into fiction.
Yeah.
You mean lying? No, just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I would say making art.
Yeah, no, I say just kidding. Yeah, making art. Yeah, I mean, one thing is like just having the courage to keep beginning again. Like I get really attached to things I write, and I become convinced I'll like never write again, or that like I've produced material and like I've made it and like it represents time and I can't throw that time out, But like there are no wasted sentences. Like I write so much. For example, when I'm getting to know a character, tons about like their childhood and their background. Like most of that doesn't go in, but like was it wasted? No, I learned about them, and one hopes you could like detect the intimacy I have with that character, even if you're not getting all those sentences. And so too, like material from my own life, like I think I was always just re-encountering it, like trying to re-encounter it. And similarly to the curiosity that led me to always be writing from a character that was in the periphery of one chapter, I think I began to want to like decentralize myself. Like I was like, I remember trying to write about going through a checkpoint, and it was like, my experience of going through a checkpoint doesn't like convey the reality of going through a checkpoint. Like there's a reality of a checkpoint, of what it means to have your body controlled by that checkpoint, or to be the one controlling other people's bodies, an Israeli experience or a Palestinian experience. Like neither of those was like my experience. My experience was one of sort of like novelty, and be like, wow, that's a big gun. Like, here's my passport, like, So like it wasn't, I became uninterested in myself at the center. So I think one thing is just to like try to re-encounter the material, but almost like letting go of like just one option of your own, of filtering it through yourself, if that's like possible. Like, could you filter it through someone else's experience? Like, as I think Amir might have agreed, not perfectly, of course, but I think a lot of that is like a fiction writing impulse. I feel like you say like the most consequential choice we make is like what POV, what point of view to write in. Yeah, I feel like and so I think like so sometimes like the events, most of the events in the book, like deaths or acts of violence or things like that, are things like maybe I witnessed in some way, like, but I'm not telling them as I experienced them. I'm filtering those events through someone who's whose body or experience is perhaps more implicated in them, for example. So I think that, like, I think a lot of it comes down to like thinking about point of view and recognizing that when you tell a story, like, that is just another point of view. You know, me as a narrator. Yeah. Is that?
Yeah.
Also, if you have questions, I know there's like young writers here, like about like MFA programs or like, I don't know, your own writing, like just complain about writer's block. It's like, yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. This has been really interesting, and your text has been really beautifully crafted. So I have a question, circling back to some of the points you made earlier about the intention of your text. And so you spoke to how you want to raise the minority perspective. And so could you talk a little bit to how your novel deals with anti-Semitism and raising Jewish voices? I understand it's a loaded question, but I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I don't think I used the word minority, but that's fine. Just putting that out there. There's Jewish characters, and so what are you asking?
Well, a lot of the Middle East is polarized through hate, particularly through the lens of nationalism and religion. And I want to know how you appear to grapple with anti-Semitism, which is a prominent theme in this read.
It's so interesting. Like, one of the reasons I dropped out of divinity school is like, I don't really have like a mind for like theory, like ideology or like even like critical apparatuses. What I really care about is like the material reality of people's lives. Like what smells remind them of their grandparents, or how do they get to work? Like what are the logistics of them getting to work? And what kind of petty arguments do they have with people at their workplace? And like, what are those arguments about? And like, how much sex are they having? Like, these are things I really want to know about. And like, these are things I'm deeply curious about. Everyone in this book has a position within like a power structure and probably like, some kind of paperwork referring to their nationality. So yeah, those things are going to shade elements of their life and their experience. But I never really thought about it like from a kind of, I didn't do it like deductively. I wasn't like, okay, how am I going to take on anti-Semitism? Like, based on anti-Semitism, what smells remind him of his grandparents? Like, I really just sort of started with like the physical experiences, like within the body and like memory and like home life. And I trusted the political would, shape everything the way it shapes us all the time. These structures are invisible and we cannot escape them. But I didn't worry about it too much, I would honestly say. I just went like sentence to sentence and really tried to go not as like theoretical or as ideological as I could, but as intimate as possible. But yeah, thank you for the question. Mm-hmm.
I think this is maybe not a useful question. I understand it might be strange with creative writing teachers in the room, but how do you think one goes about getting better? Or how do you think, or those of us who do try to write, what's a good way to practice writing and improve your writing?
I love that question. I think about that all the time. Thank you for asking it. Are you in the creative writing program here? Very cool. I was reading so much before I had the courage to start writing. And like, I think when I started writing, it was like a kind of reading, or I was just like imitating stuff I really liked. And that's fine. Like maybe some people really have like a voice inside them and it's like really innate and it's just like there. But I think some of us, like, we find our own like music often through like imitating the music of other writers, and we kind of just get there eventually. And I would feel I was more a writer like that. And I was like, so I would say just like read like a lot, honestly. Like, and I don't know, do you write prose? So I read a lot of poetry, even though I do not write poetry. Poets are wild. Like, It's true though, you know, like the amount of apparatus I need to tell a story, to like give a narrative, it's like dozens of pages. Like there's so much I feel like I have to set up just so I can get to a point where I'm really writing. Like when I'm really inside, when I'm in like the marrow, you know, like maybe there's a 30-page chapter and there's like 2 pages that feel like to me of like real writing. Poets somehow like, I don't know how they do it, but they tell a story, I guess, to use a concept from Kelly, like economically, you know? And so I read quite a bit of poetry to try to, just because I think like, yeah, there's some technical elements you have to learn from reading fiction, like how to manipulate time. Like, not really gonna learn that like from a poem that like I could think of, you know? Probably though, but I just can't think of one. But just in terms of like, what is a story and how can you convey a story and like in what like gestures and moments? Like I read a lot of like Marie Howe. I just forced Natasha Trethewey upon my dear friend Kit. I saw it in the bookstore and I was like, I need to get this for you. So yeah, like I read, I think reading poetry has made me a better writer. But I say like reading, imitating stuff you like is like totally allowed and good to do. I also, if I read a passage I like, I'll just copy it out. Like for 2 reasons. One, I think it helps like me internalize it more. Like what are the moves this writer is making, you know, like, and how could I do that? And I'll copy it out by hand or I'll type it up. And the other thing is then you can secretly fantasize that you're writing it. It's like the best feeling ever. But don't tell anyone about that part. It's embarrassing. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
I was just gonna ask, you were saying that when you read poetry, you analyze the moves and how it uses story along. How do you do that?
Yeah, when I read, when I read fiction, I would say analyze them. I don't understand how poetry works. I'll be real with you. Like to me, it's like it's almost like magical. Like it's not. You know, like it's craft. I don't mean to say that it's not. It's just, to me, I read it just to be excited about telling stories in this like really something like reduced and expansive way. It's just like amazing. But when I read fiction, I will maybe pay attention to what moves are being made. And by that, I mean what choices the writer made to have the effect on me the writing is having. So that's a few things. One is just reading it twice, like assuming that the first time I read it, it'll just be pleasure. Like I'll just be enjoying it. But the second time, I might be better to detect what's happening. And one way I do that is I actually pay a lot of attention to my body when I read. Like, where am I feeling this physically? Like, that's a lot of times how I start. Like, you know, is it, you know, I don't know, if something's really suspenseful, I'll often feel it along my spine. That's just like I don't read a lot of suspense, but if I did, that's probably where I'd be experiencing it quite a lot, just as a way to really connect with what is happening to me when I read this. And then I try to detect what in the prose might be creating that effect. Often a good way to articulate that to myself is I'll ask myself, what would I have done in this story or in this sentence? And my assumption is I would have done something less imaginative probably, or like more conventional, and the writer is doing something I wouldn't have anticipated, you know? And someone makes a decision I wouldn't have expected, or a sentence ends slightly before I thought it would, or some rule is broken. Like they've used a bunch of adverbs, and like real writers don't use adjectives, just verbs. I don't know, you know. So something I wouldn't have done. So I'll look for that. Like where did they make a decision I might not have thought to make, and what could I learn from that? And that's like a really great way to begin to articulate to yourself writing as a series of decisions that you yourself can copy and eventually start to make your own. But there's moves that I like straight up copied from other writers, or like I think of myself as having copied them. So for example, there's this moment when there's this character with a secret. Secrets are great, but they're also hard to work with because the longer a character keeps a secret, the more it's valued, right? So the more payoff you have to give the reader, and it's like going on for the whole chapter, and the secret's getting more and more expensive, and you're like, how am I going to make this worth their while? And I remembered I read actually while I was reading this an Annie Proulx collection. She wrote like Brokeback Mountain most famously, and she has a story called A Run of Bad Luck. And in it, there's a character. Everyone's keeping this secret from this one character, and finally the secret is revealed, and it's like been going on for pages, and these are like rural guys, and they have like, it's like deer hunting season, and it's like, is someone gonna get shot? You don't know, like, and he says, you thought I didn't know? And it's like, it completely, it was like electric to read, because it was like, oh, it just completely, instead of fulfilling the terms, it just changed the terms, you know? And it gave me like 2 stories for the price of 1, essentially, which is the ultimate in value, I think. So I did that, basically, when I had a character with a secret. And so yeah, I probably should write a letter to Annie Proulx and be like, thank you. But yeah, does that help? Yeah, cool.
So we've run out of time, but I want to ask one last question.
Yeah, please.
It's like a couple moments tonight in the Q&A may have made people tense, and I think I don't want to not rush. I don't want to rush over that.
Sure, yeah,
Because I
for
think
sure.
It's valuable because it was so honest, even if it's completely different to right or can be out in the world. And my question for you is that, you know, it's so hard to establish a relationship with your own work. Try to figure out how you feel about it and what you're trying to do. And you can't, especially when it's published, you can't control how readers respond to it. So this is your first novel. This is your first experience with you know, readers responding in unexpected or maybe expected ways, whatever. Has it changed your relationship with your book? And how do you deal with that? Because I think everybody will experience this.
Yeah.
Every writer will experience it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny. I thought of this as like a beach read, you know? Just kidding, sorry. Yeah. I think like, I know that there's a lot of pain and fear and anger, and that makes sense to me. And I think of the book now as like existing in a conversation quite separate from me. This is actually my first in-person event, so it's been like special and exciting and at times frightening, you know, to engage with all the feelings that come up for people regarding this subject matter. But I think like, for me, when I held the book for the first time, like, honestly, I felt totally fulfilled. Like, I'd gotten everything I wanted. What happened next felt like I had to like detach from it or something and just start something new. And to me, that's kind of what's like sustained me, like that I'm interested in what people say, and I'm interested in how they feel, and I'm moved and honored when people open up their hearts to stories outside their own, and I understand when they don't want to. You know, all of that, that all seems fair to me. I've had to move on, you know, I have like new work, and I think that's like a big thing, like just like keep writing, you know, like return to like yourself, return to your voice, keep waking up early, like keep going to or staying up to like 8, like 2 a.m, whatever, you're amazing. So keep staying up late. I think for me, like just to know like, and also, yeah, I mean, a lot of discussions about the book also, maybe, like no one said it's boring. That's something. Yeah. But yeah, I think just like return, like, you're looking for something that can sustain you, God willing, like your whole life. You know, not just like one book, not just like one chapter, not just one sentence, like whatever that is, like find that and return to it.
I think that's the best advice. It's hard to follow.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.